Well, hello everybody. Thank you very much for joining in on this lunchtime talk, design and young children. It's what I think is going to be a very interesting hour, or maybe slightly beyond an hour, depending on how enthusiastic the questions are. If you do have any questions, pop them in chat, and Victoria Thornton will pick them up as the proceedings go. We're very privileged to have Victoria chairing the event today. In terms of her background, in 2021, she established the Thornton Education Trust, which aims to build a community of practitioners focusing on how to empower children and young people to have a voice in their present and future environment through a platform for knowledge sharing called the Inspire Future Generation Awards Programme. Their next project is going to be an Engage toolkit, which will be launched at the LFA Festival on the 26th of June. I'll include that in Urban Update, so you'll get further information of that as and when it materializes. It will outline examples of how built environment professionals can deliver projects as part of their social value commitment. She's also the Design Museum, a committee member of the Design Museum Learning and Research Committee. She's Director of Architecture for Kids and a trustee of the Bath Preservation Trust and chairs the Architecture and Planning Committee there. She was a former president of the Architectural Association School of Architecture and a founder of Open House London and the Open City programme. So I'm going to pass over to Victoria, and as I said, if you've got any questions as the discussion proceeds, do put them in chat, and Victoria will pick them up as and when appropriate. So thank you very much. Welcome, Victoria.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to chair this. Actually, I think a really important initiative, well, not only initiative, I think important area that really gets undervalued time and time again. And I'm hoping that today will be another opportunity to really get to hear what's going on, what suggestions for need to change, and what's the step change to ensure that we engage in and children participate in the built environment. We're just waiting for Finn Harper, who's going to be our first speaker. Finn actually is a former director of Open City. He took over from two past me when I stepped down, but also is now architecture critic of The Guardian. So maybe, Robert, you can keep an eye on for him coming on to the Zoom meeting. This is followed by Malcom Hamilton. And Malcom is creative director of Play Disrupt. I just like the idea of disrupting play. I mean, play is disruptive anyway, so to add to disrupting actual play is quite interesting. So he's really looking at active play working to have clever, playful mechanisms to bring people to the ideas of the built environment. How can you use play, whether it's for adults, but very much today about children and young people. And I think this is going to be really interesting to see how we can look at different ways of approaching this subject. And I think bringing someone from a different discipline is quite interesting within this. It's followed by Anna McMillin, and also Jeff Nottage. Anna, I think quite a few knows, is Director of Architecture at Broadway Malyan. I have to say also winner of the Architecture and Education Awards on the Collaborations with School category just recently. And Jeff Nottage, who's Head of Design, Turley Associates, and formerly Head of Planning at Broadway Malyan. So that's quite a range, and I think what we're looking at here is some different perspectives with Finn, and I can just see Finn come in. Hi, Finn. perfect timing. And then Malcolm, actually the activities, the way of approaching it, and then Anna and Jeff. I think coming from the architectural urban design background, but also planning in terms of how you can bring children, young people into the planning process, which, as we all know, is still quite difficult. So just to remind us finally that there are different policies that exist globally. There's the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Children. There's also, in terms of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, also mention children specifically. So within the global context, children and young people, the rights of young children are paramount in those policies. But when we come down to the UK, it's a bit more spread across different policies, but very rarely right at the forefront of those. So maybe that is something we can discuss and talk about in the Q&A. So with no further ado, Finn, I have just mentioned you. I wasn't sure whether you were in when I was talking about it, but if you want to take over, do you have slides, by the way? Do you have presentation?
Can you see the corner of a school in Switzerland? Yeah, can everyone see that? Yeah, good. Okay, does it change if I do that to a slide?
Yes, it does.
Yes, good. Okay, great. I've been given 15 minutes, so I'll try and move fairly quickly. I want to ask you a question, which is, how often have you seen a child scolded for climbing the wrong way up a slide? I see this all the time whenever I'm hanging out at a playground with my friends and their kids. We think of play as this kind of liberated, free space where, you know, anything goes and there are no rules. But in fact, if you look at the design of many playgrounds, they're extremely prescriptive. There are objects that are designed to be used in a very particular way, and children are often kind of quite closely policed on how they use those objects. And this is no real surprise, because this approach to playground design has a long history, as does the whole approach to the question of, like, what role should young people have in the making of cities in relationship to architecture. Many of our playgrounds are still mostly designed around this sort of Victorian idea of like gymnastic exertion as the main form of play: monkey bars, assault courses, balance beams, things to climb, etc. And even today, kind of brand new playgrounds like this one near me in Greenwich, though benefiting from a generous budget and a sort of whimsical aesthetic, it's still kind of the same stuff. It's a thing to climb up, thing to slide down. Now, I'm not saying this is bad. I'm just saying it's very prescriptive. As adults, you know, my life is enriched by finding lots of different ways to use space and objects. But children are much more closely kind of controlled in how they move through the city, what their options are. And I think this attitude to prescription is true not just of playgrounds, but of the kind of the wider attitude to young people in design and planning and urbanism. So what I want to do is have a couple of provocations at the end, but really to start with a very short history of the power of children in space to provoke a kind of discussion about where we are today. So the first ever scout group is formed in America by this guy, Ernest Thompson Seton, in 1902. And what happens is the bunch of local boys vandalize his house, and rather than punish them, he realizes that the reason they've done it is because they're bored. No adults are kind of engaging them in meaningful activity. And so he starts a youth group to give them something sort of sensible to do with their time. It's loosely modeled on his kind of studies of living in nature, that he's sort of looking at Native American traditions, and he calls it Woodcraft Indians. Anyway, it's hugely influential, in particular on a soldier called Robert Baden-Powell, who a few years later takes some of Seton's ideas, in particular this one that like young people should complete these sort of bushcraft challenges to earn badges. And Baden-Powell sets up the Scouts and publishes Scouting for Boys, and then the Guides get set up a couple of years later. And suddenly Britain has its first kind of big youth movements at the start of the 20th century, dedicated to engaging young people with sort of meaningful responsibility and activity in civic life outside of school and church. Then, of course, World War I breaks out. this horrific imperial conflict. The government forces about 2.5 million people to join the army through conscription, which is massively unpopular. There's a protest in 1916 of 200,000 people in London against conscription. And one of the reasons people are so angry with conscription is that they see all these children being taken off to war and killed. The largest single group of people who die, soldiers who die in World War II, are 19-year-olds. So people are really, really kind of really scarred by this experience of watching all these young people go off to war. And after the war, there's this feeling across Europe of like collective horror, and all of these sort of civic organizations try to set up youth movements to give the young people of the sort of the next generation more opportunities and more of a sort of head start in life. And that sees all sorts of fascinating organizations spring up in the 20s. So Scouts and Guides get really, really big, but there's also things like the Pioneers, the Communist Youth Movement, the Crusaders, the Christian Youth Movement, the International Falcon Movement, which is socialist. There's these very weird English guys called the Kindred of the Kibu Kift, which H.G. Wells is a member of and eventually becomes Woodcraft Folk and so on. So you have this massive continent-wide explosion of excitement around the idea that young people could be like a bigger part of kind of cultural life, and that giving spaces and skills to the young is like a really useful and worthwhile thing to do. But of course, at this point, Britain's not a democracy, right? Women don't have equal votes to men yet. They don't get that until 1928. And so we have this sort of weird situation where there's like lots and lots of exciting things happening. Civil life is kind of blossoming. Civic life, sorry, not civil life, but civil liberties are not so strong. Women do eventually get the vote in 1928 on equal terms as men. Not all of the UK gets to vote on those terms, but most of it does. But then World War II happens. Another huge war plays obviously another huge role in like reshaping the culture, reshaping the country in all sorts of interesting ways. Relevant to our discussion, I just wanted to point out, obviously, it's in the aftermath of World War II that the Attlee government creates the Town and Country Planning Act, which really establishes the modern planning system. Sort of it's the first time that the idea that like ordinary British voters should have a voice in the planning process, should have a voice in what gets made in their area. So very, very sort of early stages, but that starts to be introduced into the kind of British legal planning process. The other thing that World War II does that's relevant to this sort of question of young people in architecture is it starts the adventure playground movement. So people see children and young people playing in bomb sites in remarkable and inventive ways. And they realize that maybe this prescriptive approach to playground design is not the best one. And they start to make adventure playgrounds that are like this, that are much more open-ended, where young people's sort of needs and desires are far more kind of adventurously catered for than the previous kind of generation of spaces for young people. So it's an interesting time. It's an interesting time. Flash forward to the 70s. This is when I think Britain finally becomes a democracy, when business votes in Northern Ireland are abolished and renters get to vote as well as property owners. That happens in 1973. That's still roughly the political system we have today. But the other interesting thing that happens in the 70s is that Colin Ward publishes The Child in the City, this phenomenally influential manifesto of a book, really making the case for the first time that actually the whole city should be a place for children, not just these kind of designated corners of it. And in the book, he quotes the German landscape architect Hermann Matten, who says the failure of an urban environment can be measured in direct proportion to the number of playgrounds. In other words, playgrounds are a symptom of a city that is inaccessible to the young. Quite a challenging remark, but a sort of saying that like you can't just rely on playgrounds, folks. We have to think more holistically. Young people are everywhere, they play everywhere. We can't just expect playgrounds to do all the heavy lifting for us as architects and urbanists. Into the 80s, as Victoria has mentioned, this is when the UN establishes the Convention on the Rights of the Child in 1989. Britain signs up 2 years later. Today, every single country in the world, apart from America, has signed up to this convention. It's one of the most widespread UN conventions of its kind. Brazil also lowers its voting age to 16, later followed by Austria and a few other countries. So the 80s is an interesting time. It's a moment of kind of formalizing a lot of this kind of youth empowerment movement into sort of rules and regulations. The other thing that happens in the 80s in Britain is the police launch Secured by Design. So I'm sure you all know this. It's a kind of police initiative to give officers more influence over architecture and planning in Britain. I think it's been hugely negative for young people in this country. The latest guidance on schools, for example, includes the word control 53 times, the word surveillance 26 times, and the word learning just twice, which gives you a sort of sense of where the priorities of that guidance actually lie. But it's not all bad. There's still kind of interesting stuff happening. I was really inspired by the work of Peter Hubner, the German architect who designed with children in a really kind of ambitious way. This is the Justus von Liebig School. And if you look on the left, the image, hopefully it's big enough on your screens, of the architects and the children working together. Really quite a serious piece of co-design. This is a 1:20 outline structural model. You know, when I worked at Open City, we did great work with children and young people in schools, but you know, if I'm honest, we never came anywhere close to this level of sophistication in how we were engaging them with architecture. This is really quite impressive stuff and does actually get built. Sadly, however, you know, I think Hubner remains a fairly rare example. And in fact, as the 80s give way to the 90s and the noughties, it feels like the voice of young people in Britain's built environment starts to be heard a bit less. Children are still in the picture, but I think increasingly it can feel like the picture is just a picture. It's a photograph on an ESG strategy or an EDI strategy, rather than a sincere attempt to build with and for the young. So there are still some incredible practitioners out there, but you know, we start to see more of this kind of stuff. I'm sure this will be familiar to you. Children's drawings kind of plastered on development hoardings as a sort of substitute for a more meaningful or creative engagement with youth in design. And it's kind of common now to see adults working with young people by, you know, maybe you identify a group of young people and you grant them power over some sort of limited thing within the urban environment. So maybe children get to vote on a new street name, or maybe they get to pick the theme of a mural or something like that. Occasionally this is very charming. Occasionally it sort of works rather well, but often it's sort of at root a kind of tokenistic approach to working with young people that is maybe not as ambitious as sort of previous experiments in this space have been. I really like the practitioner Lee Ivett. He's used to be chair of the Baltic Street Adventure Playground. He's an architect. He's also head of architecture school in Preston. He works with loads of community groups and young people in his practice. And he puts it like this. Children are shit at painting. I involve kids in lots of the projects I do, but I'm careful about where the boundaries are between my agency as a designer and what role the children are playing in informing my actions. Now, he's not trying to stop the children that he's working with from having power. He's actually trying to do the opposite. He's trying to use his professional skill as much as possible in a targeted way to help the children to wield power as effectively his clients. And there's something in Lee's approach that I've always found sort of challenging and that maybe a lot of us could have learned from. I have 2 minutes left. So where are we now? In some ways, you know, having been at Open City for 4 years and seen like this incredible kind of sector emerging of much more ambitious or creative youth engagement work in architecture and urbanism, there's never been a better time. You know, we're in a way, I've never seen so many practitioners excited about the possibility of working with young people. On the other hand, I do sometimes wonder if we're going backwards. You know, take for example this the spongy playground stuff. So about 40% of the money that is spent on playgrounds in Britain is spent on spongy surfacing. And that's despite the fact that really it doesn't really do very much in terms of safety. Research suggests that the £200 million we spent on spongy surfacing after 1994 in 10 years saved one life, which seems like a very high return on investment compared to, say, road traffic, where hundreds of children are killed every few years on the roads, and still pro-traffic and pro-car campaigners get to have a very loud platform on national television, while playgrounds are sort of left kind of ignored. At the same time, it's hard not to notice that Britain seems to have fallen behind our kind of European counterparts in how seriously we take youth engagement. This is the Reggio School in Madrid by Andreas Jack. It's designed in collaboration with the students. It has a tropical jungle in it to help with the science teaching. Compare that to British schools. This is from a news story 3 days ago. All the science labs, in fact, 2/3 of this entire school for 1,000 children is closed, meaning that the GCSE students currently are having to plead with the exam board for leniency because they're not going to be able to do their practical exams. So very, very quickly, you know, these three provocations I have to sort of put on the table is what do we do about what we do next? I've sort of, hopefully I've argued that we've seen this like ballooning of over the 20th century of interest in young people that has gone hand in hand with an expansion of wider kind of enfranchisement of different groups in the political process. But what do we do next? What is meaningful? You know, where do we situate ourselves? If kids' drawings on development hoardings is not meaningful and the Madrid school is meaningful, then like where do we sleep within that spectrum and how do we define it? Second, means or end. You know, do we work with young people because that's just nice, or do we do it because we are trying to achieve something bigger? Is it a means to another end, a different goal? And finally, who holds the power? You know, the reason I have mixed in so much kind of political history with this kind of youth movement history is because I do think there's a direct link between how as we have expanded the franchise of political power in the UK, young people have got more and more of a share of that franchise. And now, you know, the question is, they've changed the voting rules. You can vote with an older person's rail card. You can't vote with the young person's rail card. There's a very clear attempt to kind of reconstrain that power. And so in that context, what should we be challenging, not just within our sector, but beyond our sector, to ensure that young people's voices are properly heard in the future of city making? So I'm going to stop there. Hopefully that was lots of interesting things to think about. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vin. I think that was a good provocations and a real quick run through of where we were, where we are, and where perhaps we need to be going. Because I think definitely we're not at the end. We're on a journey, and I think you're right, and I agree that there has been much more of a change, and maybe it's COVID, something or other, but notice in the last 5-10 years, there has been more interest in children and young people within, I'm going to say, the planning process, because a lot of it coming through that. But is it really meaningful, and is it really doing what it's supposed to be setting out to do? So I think we'll be hearing hopefully more about that as we go on. There is someone who said in the chat about the Madrid asking who the I think the name of the Madrid school. So maybe Finn, you haven't put that in. If you can, that'd be great. So moving on to Malcom, and I think that's a really good segue into Malcom's. He's doing the how, the what, and definitely the now. Most probably has a lot of thought about the future as well. So can I pass you over to Malcom? And as I say, we'll have Q&A at the end, and hopefully, Finn, you'll still be around, but I know you've got to run off as well. So hopefully you can be there for a bit more provocation. Thanks, Malcom, over to you.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Finn. It was yeah, really exciting. Right, can you see all that okay? Can somebody shout yes?
Yeah.
If you can. Yeah, great. That's good. Okay, so yeah, we're right next to an adventure playground in Bristol, actually. We just moved next door to Felix Road Adventure Playground. It's just great to get in there with the kids, but also just go in there as a break as well, just to kind of, yeah, get that sort of sense of wild, disruptive, non-prescriptive play. So yeah, we're Play Disrupt, based in Bristol. We are a public engagement studio, essentially, and we do lots of work in the built environment, in health and well-being, and in academia. And this is what some of our work looks like. Work with lots of different age groups and lots of different targeted demographics. And we do a lot of work with children, which is why I've been invited to work here, to speak here today. Quick sort of whistle stop. We came from street theatre. So we used to be a street theatre company. We used to play things like massive battleships across city centres, over rivers, life-sized hangman, sheep herding games, that kind of thing. And we learned a lot about permission to play and about access and about inclusion. And it came to be that as we started to think about how it is, all the things that you need to be able to take part in playing with strangers or playing with people in the city centre or somewhere else. There's a lot to be learned there about participation, about wider participation. So we take that thinking across into our work. This is a quote I love to share. Some games shift the way that we see each other, understand each other. They're funny and they break down barriers. They invite us to see each other and ourselves differently. Play is about being open and vulnerable. Play is about that vulnerability, about responsive and yielding to the moment. You might not be playing, but if you are willing to play at the drop of a hat, the bounce of a ball, the glance of a toddler, the wag of a tail, then you are open to any opportunity. You are loose, responsive, present. Now, I usually share that quote from the point of view of thinking about how we're trying to get a good place for participants to be in, you know, so when we're getting to engage people in a conversation, we're asking people to problem solve with us, we're asking them to actively participate, then if people are coming with lots of kind of defensiveness and lots of blockers, then that can be difficult. If we're getting them into a responsive, loose place, that's a better place to work together. But actually today I'm sharing it more from the point of view of how we work with children. When we're working with children, we're working with young people, really anyone, but particularly that, then to be open to opportunity, to be loose, adaptive, responsive, present. And that's a really good place to start from. And this is from Bernard de Koven. If you want to know anything about play theory, he's an amazing person to look up. And we talk about play for all of these reasons: active engagement, better connections for people, breaking down barriers, but also from the point of view of interrogating the systems and disrupting. That's really where that disrupt thing comes from. So it being a playful disruption and using play as a disruption. And things stand out and they're experience-based. So I'm all about getting people to do things with their hands rather than just talking. I want to give you a few projects that we've done over the years and sort of pull out some of the sort of theory and the sort of practical knowledge that you might be able to take as well. So this was one of the first things we did. It was before we were Play Disrupt, we were Mufti Games, a theatre company, and we were invited by a neighbourhood forum to try and do something for them. They were creating a neighbourhood plan in a place where the local council was looking to build several thousand homes on a local big green space that used to be an airfield. So the neighbourhood forum had put sort of lots of paper questionnaires through people's doors and hadn't got very far with that. So we came along and we built an aeroplane. So we built this great big wooden aeroplane with AstroTurf wings, and that was quite cool. It was a good bit of bait or a hook. But the main thing was that we took it to the playground, and we took it to a school, and we took it to Asda, and we took it to the library. And there's a car boot sale that's held on the old runway of this park, and we took it to the car boot sale. And we were very clearly being able to bring people in and have a different kind of conversation to the council. The council had also, in their engagement, they had one of these, you know, beautiful architectural model of some of the different plans and the ideas for the development, some of the different options, which I'm sure you're very familiar with. And these models were inside a glass box rather, with a big sign on top of it that said, "Do not touch." And this in itself was inside a building. So it was almost doing everything it could to be inaccessible to children and families. So we went out and we started to talk to people, lots of children and families. And the things that were really important that came from this was not really the aeroplane. We had models, accurate, but made out of scrap. So they were simple and you could move them around. You could swap different options in and out. Here's the park now. Here's how it might be. Here's how it might be. Here's how it could be. And two particular children really stood out. One said, hang on, if you put it like this, and this particular idea kind of had some 4-story kind of buildings with a boulevard with a sort of fountain, I think, up the middle. Said, I won't be able to go through there because I'm not going to know what kids are on the other side. I'm not going to know if there are bad kids on the other side of that. So I wouldn't go through that. Now, on the other side of this development is one of the best play parks in this area, in this city, actually. And the way that some of this was designed was going to stop and get to it. And another child said, well, I live over here and my mum won't be able to see me if these houses are there. So I won't be able to go and play out there anymore. Now, it just really showed that there had really been no kind of engagement or conversation with how children use the space in any of this kind of area within the plans that had been made. And it went through, and it meant that the options and plans that were there didn't get any further at that sort of stage. And the neighbourhood plan as it went through in a well-turned-out referendum. So it taught us a huge amount, really, about thinking about how we work with children and bringing their lived experience. This was a project during lockdown. So this was working in an area called Barton Hill in Bristol. And this was working with children, particularly from the Somali community, who many of which lived in the high-rises. And for all sorts of different reasons, lots of these children were really not going out at all during lockdown for several weeks at a time. We weren't accessing green spaces. There was a huge amount of stigma, a lot of fear, and all sorts of other reasons. So we delivered little bags of Lego to them, and they all got them. And then we all came together on a video call. And the video call was really hectic because people would be on phones or tablets and the light was awful and sound was awful. But we got them together and we got playing, and we asked them to build things that they would like to see in their neighborhood or build things that they'd like to do. We then took it away, and the next week we photoshopped it. So real simple, just a simple Photoshop, like on the left-hand side here. And there was total silence when we brought this out. There was several other images. And they said, but if you do that, then on that road, then won't that be really dangerous because of the cars? And we said, yeah, but what about if there wasn't cars there? What if this wasn't a road where cars were the priority? What about if it was more of a play space? And through like several months of different work, in fact, a couple of years, we worked with them over a period of different time. We found different ways to work with this group of young people where we would annotate spaces, we'd ask questions of spaces, and sometimes we would just go out and play. We'd just be building fires and putting up structures and making swings and just finding different ways to engage them in the space that they were there and to advocate and to sort of share understanding that the design and the way that this place was made had an impact on them, and that if they could begin to have influence on that, then that would be a benefit. So to be more advocates, really. And then a lot of this work then went into design of new play areas and still funding in the area. And this picture on the left sort of always makes me chuckle in a sense about the cars thing, because this is where Bristol's first low traffic neighbourhood is now going to go into place. So all different. Have a quick drink of water, speaking fast. This is a quick project, and this is again about techniques. So this is working with Cornwall Council. This was on health. This was about a weight management program for young people, which sounds quite, it was quite a difficult subject matter, working with teenagers, particularly a lot of teenagers with learning difficulties and additional needs we worked with. And we used versions of Lego Serious Play, which is a fantastic technique for working with all kinds of people. But in this one, it was about building things. And the last exercise in this particular workshop, we asked people to build what the attributes of a program that would support people around healthy eating and weight management might look like. And so we're not asking them to do spreadsheet. We're not asking them to kind of exactly say what it would be or what it looks like, but we ask them to understand the attributes. And so as you can see on the right-hand side here, it needs to be welcoming. Trust is important. And then they could use different shapes and positioning of this in order to be able to prioritize and see where these things might be. They also built that there must be lots of different access points and different kinds of activities. So from that, when we were then creating the report, we were able to inform the council that we were consulting and doing this work for, about where the various different importance of these different attributes of this particular service might be, and also which sort of points might not work, and all the rest of it. So I'm kind of speaking fast for the time. We took this into another project. So this is directly into a design project. So this was working for Portsmouth Council, and it was looking at the design of a green space. So it's essentially thinking about within the city centre to become a new green space. Very early kind of visioning work. But they asked us to create a pack for them so that they could go off and do the engagement themselves. So it wasn't always us and our facilitators. They could just go and do this themselves. And so we created this game because I suppose we're always thinking about people as problem solvers. You know, the participants, they're working with us. We're working on a design challenge together. And so in this instance, we asked them not just what do you want to do, but what are the different things that are going to support that thing? So, for instance, hide and seek. In order to play hide and seek, you need good places to hide. You need good places to seek from. You need lots of different people to come from all kinds of different areas. Okay, so you need lots of different access points, high places, low places, hiding places. You can then, you know, really loosely and very naively and simply put that into some design terms. And I like this one here, which is on the skate park. So the sign there is skate park. Okay, that's the activity. And what do you need to support that skate park? Well, you need material that doesn't degrade, okay? You need a play park with stuff for all sorts of ages. It needs to be painted in bright colours. But this one I love. You need a community. Skating is like a family. That community is really important. And so that needs to be thought of within the design of this place. So we're trying to, rather than just do that very light touch, we're always trying to find playful ways to add lots of more depth to it. This would be another similar, and this was for a playground, so an accessible playground for children with additional needs in North London. And for this, we built a playground essentially and used that as a way to be able to consult with them. We often use spinning wheels where we've got lots of different ways in. They could use a spinning wheel for different design categories: nature, land, air, water. And then we would invite them to think about different games that they might like to play and different ways that other children might like to play. So they might come up with a really good water game. And then we could say, okay, what about if a child was visually impaired? What about if they used a wheelchair? And they could help us think about different, all the different affordances that a playground might need to have. And they did it through running around and playing and all that sort of stuff. And we were able to gather data, which then fed in towards the tendering process. And this is an activity that we do lots and lots and lots, and we call it one play thing, but it's essentially chalking. So we use this lots and lots, and we say, this is a format that we sometimes use where we ask people to write instructions and make invitations and to ask questions, but sometimes we're using it in different ways. But essentially, we're using chalk to annotate a space to get sentiment and opinion of the space as it is and how it might be in the future. We use a lot, it's kind of feeds into sort of street art and that kind of thing as well, and lots of comedy within it. We used it recently in the middle of Bristol in Quakers Friars, and we got this. So we got this beautiful, this full square completely covered in chalk in about 3 or 4 hours. And as the adults, as we talked to them about some of the, you know, engagement that was happening in that area, because of the way the children were all drawing and all making that stuff, everybody's creative outlets, their creative flow became much stronger as well. And we kind of got lots of kind of different conversations through it. And we were left with this. And even the security guards, who are usually quite uptight there, started to relax and play. So these are techniques really I'm sharing that anyone can use. And the final thing, just my last 30 seconds, is a project that I'm working on at the moment, and this is the public map platform. So this is University of Cambridge with University of Cardiff and Wrexham as well. It's on the Isle of Anglesey in Ismorn, and it is working with the council up there, and it is attached to the Future Generations Act. So it's building a digital mapping platform, which will inform planning from the point of view of what young people need and young people's rights and all of those things there that Finn talked about earlier and Victoria talked about. So putting their rights and their lived experiences and their ideas into a format and to really inform the planning system. And the idea and the ambition is to inform the nationwide and internationally informed planning systems from the point of view of thinking about young people. So there's lots of different strands. We're designing some of the symbology of that, working with young people and what kind of things they want to map and why, how they might be represented. But do take down that website and follow that, because this is a really exciting project for years to come that hopefully will have a massive influence there. And I think that's me. So I will stop. And that says, boom.
Thanks very much, Malcolm. Incredible number of projects you're doing there. And I think it's interesting, perhaps also for the audience, that so many are with the councils as well. Excuse me. Because we often think of it from these are either from communities, but when the councils are involved and thinking about this, how they can engage with children, young people, then we're starting to think forward rather than backwards, I would say. But let us go on to Anna and Jeff. Say Anna from Broadway Malyan and Jeff Nottage from Turley Associates, so formerly at Broadway Malyan. So I'll hand over to you, Anna, for a presentation. Look forward to it.
Thank you. Thanks, Victoria. Thank you. So Jeff and I will take you through our activity entitled The Future Village Reimagined, which was reimagined by the children of Aylesford Primary School. We'll go through 3 parts in this presentation. First, we'll explain the background and the context to this activity. Then we'll describe and show you what it is exactly what we asked the children to do, what was their brief and what they've done. And then in third point, we'll reflect on what this means for urban design and what contribution we got from the children and the children from us in regards to this activity. So over to Jeff first.
Here we go. That's
Okay.
good. Thanks. Thanks, Anna. Yes, there was a few issues we want to explore really in relation to urban design and young children. I think the first one to say is that despite the important role that we as urban designers, architects and planners have in shaping the environment, children don't know very much about these professions. They don't know what a planner does or an urban designer does. And in fact, think back to when I was at school, it was maybe GCSEs or A-levels before I really understood anything about these professions. And even then, not everything. So that's one thing. The second thing is there's always been very much a lack of engagement with the young children during public consultation events, which is surprising given that most of the master plans that we're designing will be delivered within 10 to 15 years. And it's actually the places that these children will ultimately live in, work in and have fun in. So they do need to be involved. And thirdly, many of the designs that they don't address the needs of young children. They don't fully understand the perception, the use of spaces, parks, street design. So these are all aspects that we think young children should really be involved in. So just bringing this onto the next slide, hopefully it works. There we go. So the 2 things that sort of influenced what we did is, first of all, at Broadway Malyan, we did a a thought leadership piece called The Reimagined Village, which looked at how we shape the villages of the future and looked at aspects such as the scale of them, but also things like climate resilience in the village of the future, what jobs will happen there, what local facilities will be required, the mobility, how you'll get to and from them. So as an exercise that we were looking at sort of future gazing in terms of the sorts of things that new settlements and new villages should need in the future. At the same time, if we go to the next slide, please, Anna. At the same time, Aylesford Primary School were doing were studying the built environment, and their theme was places for the future. And we learned about this through our colleague Rachel, whose son was at the school, and he was involved in the topic and found it interesting. Rachel told us about it. We also had a large master planning commission in the area at the time, so we thought we'd join the dots together and go in and see what they thought about the place of the future and how it tied in with the work that we were doing. So if you go next slide, please, Anna. Thanks, and then the next one. So last spring we went in and joined in the activity, or ran the activity. I'm not sure what's more of a pressurized environment, actually doing a major design presentation, design review panel, or standing up in front of 30 children in front of a class, providing their morning's education. It's probably the latter, to be honest with you, but nevertheless, So we first of all divided the groups into 5 tables around the classroom. And then next slide, please, Anna. And the first thing we did was explain what we wanted to do, but also the roles. We want to give each child a role in the process. So one of them was going to be at each table, one of them will be an architect, one of them will be an engineer in terms of transport and engineering. We thought the environment was an important thing to tackle and discuss with them. So we gave one of them the role of the ecologist, one of them the role of the developer, but we also wanted to understand that it is a process from both sides. So we gave one of them the role of being a local resident who might have interests that are different from the rest of the roles and responsibilities. And then both Anna, myself, and the teachers played the role of the council officers. Next slide, please, Anna. And what we did, we provided them with an A1 sheet, which we'd set out some features that you might find if you're planning a new village of the future. Things like woodland, ponds, etc. And what we wanted to do is we got them to name their village, give it a bit of an identity. We got them to identify who was playing each role within the exercise. And then we wanted them to start to think about what they would want to put in their village of the future and list those. So I'll pass back to Anna, who will run through the next part of the exercise.
To set out the tone of the exercise for them, we gave them some precedents and asked them, so what could go on in your village? And we deliberately gave them precedents that are slightly out of the ordinary, out of what they see every day, for different aspects of what goes on in a village, for homes, for green spaces, for traveling, for environment, and for future work. So for each of these themes, we gave them a set of images, or we presented them with options about, so what could the village homes be? Could they be skyscrapers? Could they be, modern homes? Could they be like the LA house on the hill? We gave them things to sort of bring them out of the conventional modes of thinking of a home, and the same applied to green spaces. So some of it is more tied to their everyday reality, and some of it is really not. For example, for village green spaces, we said, what if everything is virtual? What if all the green spaces are just, you sit in front of a computer and just play football and play whatever you want to play? The same for travel. We said, could there be just normal eco buses? Is as simple as people cycling, or could there be a zeppelin or magnetic train, etc., or a cart for deliveries? In terms of the environment, we again pushed it quite far, but the purpose of this beginning was really to get children into the imagination of what could things be in a future village, and to help them to think freely about what they were going to design. For the environment, we even brought aspects such as, could there be a lot of floods? Is there going to be the need for solar panels because it's going to be a warmer climate? Or are we going to have lots of drones spraying the soil with pesticides because we need food for everyone? And we kind of gave these sort of provocative themes and provocative scenarios. In terms of future work, would there be all robots? Are you just working from home on a laptop? Or is it more like we go to a giant kind of Google, Apple campus type, and everyone works in these futuristic type buildings? Or is it just about being in a library like today? Or is that people in the village actually work and build their own homes and shops, like the image on the right? And then in terms of the activity itself, we called it the mission. Some of it has a parallel with what we do as practitioners naturally. So the first one was about coloring the existing features. This is, in a way, do a little bit of a site analysis, if you wish, which is what we do when we start planning for anything anyway. But then from that point on, and it was to get them used to the kind of scale of the place and what that was. There were a few features like a stream, a junction, a few trees and so on, some topography to get them to enter the site, if you wish, without being on the site, because obviously that was just an illustration. And the second thing we asked is, what goes on in your village? Do a little bit of a planning, think about what would you like that village to be like. And then that was before they started designing. And in terms of design, they could construct, design, write, stick, do whatever they want. It was total freedom. And just shortly after they started, we gave each of the groups what we called the unexpected things. These were scenarios that we created so that they would all go in slightly different directions. So we had the scenario of flood, We had another where there was a forest and everything was, the area was fully covered in trees. We had another one for a hot climate, and we then let them go off with those themes and think in those terms a little bit. So we got different results. We also, those images, the bubbles, represent some stickers we gave them as well to help them label activities as well as they went through the design, and they worked in groups of 5. So and they were given a lot of materials from pens, crayons, glue, etc., to try to work through. And last, once they've developed their village, their future village, we said that they were going to present to the rest of the class and to us their ideas. We said, please remember your job role as you go through. Remember to work as a team and to listen to each other's ideas. And he said, yeah, for fun play, good luck and enjoy. I think it's over to Jeff here to start the beginning of what this brought to us and to them.
Thanks, Anna. Yes, there were different elements here. There were elements that we thought that they learned from it, but also elements that we learned from it too. So just the next slide, please, Anna. In terms of what they learned, it was quite good to explain to them the professions involved in planning and design of the built environment, to get them to understand what a planner does, what an engineer does, what an architect does, because many of them didn't know. I wouldn't have known at that age either. And also about the idea that decisions are made, but it's not just someone coming along and building what they want. There's a process that needs to be gone through. So it allowed them to understand that, but also the role of the local resident, and in that they also have a say in what goes on in their local area. So maybe who knows, we may have inspired someone to go to a public consultation event next time with their parents. We may have inspired the next budding engineer or architect or urban designer. But it was just to allow them to understand the sorts of roles and responsibility involved in creating the built environment around us. The other thing they learned, which will be the next slide, I think it was important for them to understand that actually, projects like this involve collaboration and teamwork. So it's never about one person's big idea, in that it's not that. It's the same in the industry that we're working in, and actually the best results come from getting inputs from everyone, listening to each other's ideas, negotiating. So I think that was a really important element of the exercise, and they did do that. You could see at the start they all had their own ideas, but when we told them actually think about listening to each other, they really did do that, and they started to come up with some good ideas and actually played the roles and responsibilities in many ways that we'd asked them to. So we thought that was an important part of the element of education. And the third thing, and the aspect on the next slide, is at the end of the presentation, as Anna said, we got them to stand up and actually present back to us, which was an interesting activity. They did very well, and you could see it sort of help build their confidence into presenting their ideas back to people and explaining the work that both they and their group had done. And then, as well as what they learned, there are elements of the exercise that we learned as well. So the next slide, please, Anna. I think one of the things that stood out for me was, and Anna, was the strong influence of places that children have visited in their proposals. So they would often cite, say, things like a local park that they like going to, or a holiday destination, or places that they visited with their grandparents or uncles and aunties or parents, or citing places in cities or towns that they'd visited. So they were using these references, that places that they enjoyed being in, and using them in the exercise that we undertook. And it's probably very much similar to what we do as urban design practitioners in terms of understanding and really sort of think about the places that work. So children like us, they want memorable, joyful places that are inspirational, and that certainly came through in the exercise. And the next thing that we learned, on the next slide, please, Anna, is that, again, I don't know if we really learned it. I think we probably already knew that children knew more than we give them credit for. They were aware of the environmental factors, things like sustainability moving forward, things like climate change. They were aware of that. They knew about electric vehicles, solar panels, wind farms. It was really interesting. And actually, again, the reason why they should maybe take more involvement in consultation is because actually they probably know a lot more than some of the people that may end up attending consultation events. So yeah, it was really, really interesting to see what we learned and what they learned from the exercise. So the last couple of slides, I'll pass you back to Anna.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to finalize this presentation with thinking about how this contributed to urban design as a profession. And I think we took some important findings out of it for what we do in our everyday lives as master planners and architects. The first was that children quite easily linked design to economic and environmental outcomes. And ultimately, their instinct was to take an integrated approach to master planning, which we can think many times should be a natural approach to design and to the planning of places, but many times we know it isn't. We know we separate the design profession and the design outcomes, the design as one thing, one discipline, one realm of concerns. And then what that means for the economy and for the environment is something else. Sometimes, often in the end, comes the sustainability consultant and does the sustainability report, or in the end, someone, looks at it and calculates how many jobs that's going to generate. But there isn't really sometimes the integrated approach between all the disciplines. It was spectacular to see how intuitive that was in the children's performance in designing a future village. Some specific examples were quite remarkable. There was one case, one group who immediately drew a factory. You can see these goofy, they give, childish names, but the Goofy.co was a factory on site who produced bricks and building materials for the local village to be built. That was quite interesting. The other one, the scenario where there was a warmer climate. So they created a whole narrative around the tourism economy, about beaches and leisure parks, and how what they were designing was then feeding back into the economy, how more people were joining. You can have many perspectives on whether you think of a village would be on this sort of approach to the economy. But the link they established between design outcomes and economic outcomes, I thought was quite remarkable, as well as environmental. In the coming back to the one with the warmer climate, you can see those dots with the lines. That's basically a whole energy consideration to how they would take a solar farm, which is the bottom. I'm not sure if you see my cursor. So they had a solar farm, and then all the touristic developments were being built, taking in consideration the energy that was generated by the solar farm, and then they had space for the solar farm to grow as the developments were growing. So there was even a sort of time thinking into it, which I thought was quite spectacular for children in year 6. And sometimes it's missing in practitioners' propositions, if I may be honest. Another aspect of the contribution to urban design, I would think, was the environmental design approach taken from the outset. I kind of alluded to that in the previous slide, rather than in the end someone comes and overlaps a sustainability strategy on top. They actually started by thinking about that from the beginning, from the ways they were designing the village. There were, for example, concerns with energy sources, like the warmer climate. This one, the forest village, they had a lot of ideas about how they could use various sources of energy to generate and consume energy, and then transport the energy. And with that, then they were locating developments in areas that were closer or away from that in relation to how it was going to save energy or generate energy. It was actually quite interesting, and they certainly took it to a level of depth that is beyond design. And again, it comes to my first point. The integrated approach was really natural to them, and I think that's something that the urban design profession needs more of. Sorry. The third point was their imagination. Probably not a surprise, given we're working with the activity was with children. But I think that there was a sense of we can dream higher, we can dream unconstrained, which I thought was quite inspirational. And you can see in the types of things they propose and the mix of uses they create is very much unconstrained. And that's something sometimes we sort of probably slightly short of. Obviously, they take it to sometimes, a flying bubble and so on. There's a degree to which it is more childish, but being able to break the boundaries, it kind of exceeded our concern in the beginning that we had to provide them with off the ordinary examples, because actually they could take it a lot further than we probably have expected in the beginning. Another one, and I think another extremely important contribution to urban design from this activity with children, was the thinking from creating mixed places with activities from the outset, and how mixed activities and communities and the construction of community and community uses actually drove the designs and the thinking of what a future village could be, rather than housing estates, which we do so many times, so often. They really designed, I think, the life in their children, in their villages, rather than just buildings like we sometimes do. And they designed, first they started with the life and the activities they wanted to see, and from that then they went and decided what buildings and what infrastructure then we need to make that happen, rather than the other way around, which is something that we all sometimes read in theory books, but we practice probably not enough of. And then in terms of the final outcome, probably highlight that for the children, this is really positive, because this activity was very well received, and the head teacher and the teachers in the school decided that this activity will now form part of the Aylesford school's curriculum. So for us, that is really rewarding. For us, we're trying and we're expanding the program now, and we're preparing a similar activity to other schools in different contexts, including in urban contexts where the site will be different. Instead of a village, will be a more urban site. And I think this brings me to the end of our presentation. I'm not sure if you want to add something here to the contribution, Jeff, or if
No,
not,
I think that covered everything, and conscious of the time as well. But no, it's really very useful exercise, and I think the children enjoyed it as well. So that's good, because they obviously gained quite a lot from the day. So yeah, a thoroughly enjoyable day out for hopefully everyone. Thanks.
Over to you, Victoria. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Anna and Jeff. And it was good to see how the kind of process you went through within the school, because sometimes we talk about it, but we don't really, we see here's the aim and here's the outcome and quick output. But I think it's a process that we need to perhaps understand when you're engaging with children and young people. I'm now going to open it. We have about 10-15 minutes of questions, and obviously have a few oneself. But if there are any that are coming through, if you could just put them onto the chat room, and I can pick them up from there. And I'm just looking at one. So, there's one here. Is from Lisa, saying clearly the opportunities that we can use effective engagement, even better collaborative design to actually shape the environment, as in Malcolm's example of the children explaining how they use the park. But the risk is that engagement is a standalone fun activity with no real life impact on design proposals. Is this where being specific about what the end reason for engagement is important? Or would speakers say there is a value in the process, even if there's no visible impact on the outcome? So I don't know, Malcolm, whether you want to, so first directed to you.
Sure. So that particular activity, that was basic. The stage in that was going towards procurement. So it was Redbridge Council. So they were then putting together the tender for the delivery of the play park. So the work that went on, it wasn't just that one. We did lots of different workshops in different places, but all of those kind of findings then informed that kind of going forward. So I think that's certainly what we're always trying to do, is try and make sure that it is informing in some way, and trying to get it into the language in some kind of way to inform the design of the place, to help make decisions within the design of it, and that there will be more co-design as it goes on. I think that there is some benefit, actually, even with outside that. I think, there is a value in participation, and a value in engaged participation where you are problem solving, because often, as engagement people are always or often involved in things where actually you don't get that. It doesn't be tokenistic, but we don't necessarily know, it might be 5-10 years on until the actual until the actual visioning actually turns into something. But actually being involved and participating, and actually having your brain connected in and thinking about different aspects of what this is trying to be, so that you are involved. I do think there is a benefit there, but obviously, yeah, it's far better that it has those clear connections. And I think that's about collaboration, working with designers, as much as possible within the design of the engagement, so it's holistic.
Anna, kind of what your thoughts on it? And also, I think it was interesting to see that you are replicating it, but also the school is replicating it and carrying and doing it again, because this is, if we're talking about formal education, which in a way you're within the formal education part here, that when we're looking at school education around this area, it's very, very, very little, virtually non-existent. So I suppose it's interesting to hear how where do they fit it into their teaching, if they're, now that they're going to repeat it. So is where does it sit, I suppose, is my question added to the Lisa's question.
My understanding is that there's a part of the program on that year that is about places, where they study architectural styles, I suppose. They study high streets and the future or the evolution of high streets. And it's within that part of the existing curriculum that this activity came into and took a good part of a half day, a little bit more than a half day of the students. My understanding is they will feed into the curriculum for the same program, the same part of the curriculum for the next years. So it is not outside the standard curriculum. It's just a different way to teach the same, if you wish. But obviously it's a more comprehensive way to teach some of the same contents, because they're actually doing it. They're trying to propose something. They're actively involved in creating a new place, as this is a more active way to understand how that happens and to learn than to actually just study how high streets evolved or how architectural styles of homes have evolved over time.
Yeah, thank you. Another, I think, coming to Todd Strenner, saying, what would you say to a skeptical counsellor about the evidence of better places resulted from initiatives like this? And I think this is one of the issues often where we have development regeneration is usually going through the planning process, a local authority in one form or another. And it can actually be not taken as important in by the planning committee, or the conditions are not put in there. They might go under the, I always remember the statement of community involvement, for example, or an SPD, but very rarely it's in there per se within the council. So councillors most probably are the political end of all this. How do we think councillors can see the value of this? So when we're saying what is the value, the evidence of it, how do you think the best way, or a way in which you can show that that evidence to prove to the councillor, or to engage them in a sort of meaningful way forward on this? And I'm going to say to Malcolm, you've been dealing with quite a few councils, and it's interesting to see where the councillor involvement is in all this. Where is it coming from? And do the councillors see this as part of their remit of their communities, for example?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, a lot of our work comes from local authorities, yeah, and it's often asking to meet certain demographics, and often working with children. So I think as long as you're framing it from the point of view of this is the lived experience of this demographic, and these are the affordances that are needed for this, and this is why it is important within design terms. I think it's rather than we went out and we did some fun things with children, I think it's about that translation in terms of it fitting in. It's like the PMP project, which is the one on Anglesey. It's about that's essentially about actioning the Future Generations Act, so that you've got the policy there, and then looking at different ways in order to be able to working with children in order to put those things into action. I think it's interesting because many engagements we've done, the councillors are very much on board. Councillors are sort of there, that they're glad it's happening, they want to see it happening. But it's also something that can really be weaponized, particularly through the press. We did some work on the Western Harbour, not this time around, but earlier on in the visioning exercise. And we did all these workshops with all kinds of different groups of people, and we used plasticine in different ways into that. And yet, when it came to the visioning exercise, there was this great vision that was taken to council, and the local press grabbed out the fact the councillors were shown children's drawings, and as if that was a negative thing, and they kind of used it as a way to belittle the whole exercise. So I think the way that these things are framed and the way that they are brought to the committee, and I think evidence is a really evidence and justification are really important words to use there to house them in something that this is important. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I think on that part, I was just going to say, add to what you said. I think if you can show case studies and examples of where this process of consulting with children and getting them involved in the process has actually led to positive outcomes, I think it's all about evidencing how valuable it is, isn't it? Rather than just saying it would be nice to do or go through the motion of the exercise. And you had some good examples in your presentation, Malcolm, of that. I think that is a very strong way of showing how important their voice is in this whole process.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think it's interesting seeing where I've worked with doing projects where you put counsellors and teenagers together on a project, and by the end of the afternoon, it's the teenagers are presenting, and the counsellors are really understanding that they're instead of looking, hearing what the kids are saying, they're actually taking on board what they're actually saying. And that's a difference because they're hearing, not just listening, and actually coming on the same kind of level of platform. So there's so many different, and I'm just kind of aware of time, there's so many different aspects we can even just be talking about this through kind of I'm going to say the legal, the policies, that they're in the global, but we've still got so much more to do on the national. And one could say in terms of government, looking at the children and young people, various acts and ways they can be included in these processes is really something that needs to be pushed further forward. But also the replication, and I think it's interesting again, the schools and actually what Malcolm was saying, that one council was asking them to create something that they could then use again. And that's really important rather than doing the one-offs all the time. It's not the reinvention all the time, but lessons learned. And I have to say, with our Inspire Future Generation Awards, the key, as well as recognizing and celebrating those who are doing incredible work, but is actually creating a resource bank for others to look in and see how others have done it and how they can use that, be as a reference or to evidence to be it to the councils that this isn't a one-off thinking by yourselves, but actually it's being done in different areas. And Cambridge, Greater Cambridge Planning Service has been really doing a lot of work on this. And I know Nsari, who's head of landscape in Bradford, was another example. But there's many actual examples. The real key issue here is they're not usually coming together. So we're trying to do as a sort of a platform to do that. Without getting into negative, but we didn't, and I'm not going to ask everybody for this, but of course, budgets keep coming up as the key barrier, I would say, until this is seen as part of any budget, i.e. engagement with children and young people in participation. It makes it very difficult for anybody who's involved in it to produce these kind of programs or initiatives. And often one sees in development, and especially developers, that there isn't a budget line for engagement with the community, and particularly with their future generation, which you would think, especially in developments take a while, that these will be their future potential residents. So I think it's where it has to become a must-have rather than a nice-to-have within the policies, that there should be this line in there, and that value should be highlighted more than perhaps we had in the past. But this actually comes back to the councils actually ensuring that this is part of their agreement, whether it's through SPD or whatever. We know it's not obligatory, but there's no reason why many councils can't actually ensure that this area of engagement or area of work is there, and you expect to see proper consultation, not just a tick box exercise, which I think has been the case. But again, there's a lot of organisations who are now taking on this role. Obviously, Malcolm's doing it, but there's quite a few others. But it is, I think, beholden on this sector to actually step up and look at how they can do meaningful engagement and promote the idea to their clients as well, that this is an important area. So those are sort of just some quick thoughts within today. And there are one or two, if you see about place sufficiency assessment regulations planning for Scotland, and Scotland does have more, and also Ireland has quite good policies as well, and Wales, by the way. So there are some policy areas that it would be worth looking at. I think also seeing that Anna and Broadway Malyan actually taking this forward as not just a one-off. I think this is another really important thing. Once you've taken and learned, because it's a learning experience as well, often for the practice, is how you can reiterate that and build upon that within your own practice, as well as just when a client comes in. It's really about doing your own CPD as well. And actually taking this through the whole practice rather than just when the client comes along and you have that opportunity to do that. So I'm going to, there's a few more actually, another one, a place standards tool for children and young people, Our Place. That's another engagement tool. So we say there's quite a few, it's just bringing these together. But today I hope, and from hearing all the speakers and presentations, there's a lot happening, which I would say wasn't happening before. We hope to see more of this because we realize the future generations are the residents of these places, and it's no reason why they shouldn't have be engaged in the process now rather than just waiting for them to be adults. So I will leave it like that. Thank you very much, all the speakers, for your presentations. And Anna, I think you just want to mention about a survey. So let me pass you back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Victoria. Thank you, all the speakers. I just wanted to wrap up and mention that this was organized by the Urban Design Group, that we've got many other events coming up, but in particular, we've got a survey to members and non-members that will be released in the next week, and would appeal to the audience to please answer our survey, because it's intended to give us more information about which themes we would like to see feature more in our UDG journal, in our events, and this really will be a helpful guidance for all of us trying to organize these sessions for members and non-members. So please fill out the survey when it's out. Thanks.